A man who lives his life online, Finn Hogan there. Plenty to reflect on there with our political panel PR consultant, Sarah Sparks, NZME's head of business, Fran O'Sullivan, and Newsroom's Marc Daalder, who's our first time on the show. Thanks for coming on, Marc. You get the first question. So Finn's talking about the online anger that still is there, anti-government. Could you see that morphing into a sort of credible political force?
I think Finn was right on the money in terms of there isn't an electoral chance for this sort of faction. You know, you could hear there already there are a number of different groups that have set up their own parties, and although the Freedom and Rights Coalition is planning to announce some sort of union today, clearly some of the big players have already said that they're not going to be participating in that. I think the factionalism here is too strong, and even if you did add everyone together, 5% is really hard. You know, establishment politicians like Winston Peters struggled to hit it.
Yep.
Colin Craig's Conservative Party didn't hit it. Yeah. I don't see there being a 5%.
Fran, can you see them playing any part in the lead-up to election 2023?
Oh, I'm horrified by it. It really disturbs my sense of well-being, I have to say. Look, you know, the thing about the protests, about Brian Tamaki and all of that, no respect for law and order, you know, going out on the motorway with all his followers. I mean, someday some mad person is going to just ride straight into them. I mean, people get frustrated by their frustration as well. And I think, you know, you kind of want to see a bit more of a sense of order. It's not comforting to us all to be discomforted all the time by protest. And while the mandate protest was legitimate, in my view, there comes a time when you really do have to move forward. And I think as a nation, we do need to be pulling together, personally.
But Sarah, do you think that we should really be, you know, ignoring something which is bubbling away like that? We can't just ignore it. We can't deny the right to protest. It does exist.
Absolutely, and we live in a democracy, and unfortunately, you know, we are facing a time where there is a lack of social cohesion, and everyone has an opportunity for free speech. In terms of the misinformation and disinformation that we're bombarded with, I really believe it's a time for critical thinking, and it's a time for us to actually stand on our values and be discerning and actually look at what's happening and make a call for ourselves and what feels true. And
this does feel true to those people, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and it shows that there are actually diverse views in the world, and we need to grapple with it as a nation. And there needs to be space.
We're going to be grappling with them as they carry on with their protests around the country. Let's move on to new COVID-19 response Minister Aisha Verrall. Marc, what do you think of her messaging?
I think the messaging is probably lacking in a bit of urgency and seriousness around COVID. You know, we heard when Omicron first arrived in New Zealand that it was a mild disease, and we can tell that that's not fully reflective of everyone's experiences. 22 deaths
a day, you know, that's the average right now. A lot more people are dying per million at the moment than other countries, aren't they? So
yeah.
Are they being serious enough?
I think the answer is no, and you know, Minister Verrall talked about risk perception changing since 2020, but I think if you looked at it from a blank slate and said, you know, we're on track to have more than 3,000 COVID deaths this year, you asked someone, a member of the public, should we be doing more? I think they'd say yes.
Yeah, how does that, Fran, how does that dovetail in with trying to get people back to work, trying to get, you know, skeleton staff, you know, reassured that there's somebody else to take their place should they get sick? Should we be reducing that 7-day isolation period?
No, I don't think so at all. I think we've got to be careful about that. It doesn't make much sense to me to bring people back into the workforce who may still be infective. I mean, when I had COVID, I was testing positive for far more than 7 days. And so, you know, I just stayed home. You know, just read the signs, didn't really want to pass it on to anyone else. And, you know, I may not have been at the infectious stage. But you know, you want to be careful. Workplaces, I think bosses have to be a bit careful about putting too much pressure on staff as well. I mean, we've come through a phase where we've learnt to be cautious. We've heard all those messages for 2 years out of the beehive about that. It's very hard to spin that round and say, well, yes, it's now going to be endemic, and you just sort of make your own judgment call. Particularly when, you know, the death rates that we do have.
But there is political pressure on, Sarah, at the moment, isn't there? Because National's saying, oh, well, come on, you need to reduce these isolation periods to 7 or maybe even 3 days. UK doesn't have anything legally binding. And so there is that sort of pressure to get people back to work and just live with it.
Absolutely, and I think that the Minister, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I believe that what she's doing is very measured, and she is taking extremely good advice. She is a person who comes from an epidemiology background, right? So I believe that you can't force measures on people either, and the balance is right. It's very nuanced, and what she is doing is bang on, and it's up to personal responsibility. We actually have to be responsible for ourselves and making the call. If we're sick, we stay at home. If we're not sick, we go to work. Let's just, part of their other messaging is around vaccination, okay? And so we were told, mandated, 90%, all those kinds of things, and yet our children under 12s, Marc, 30% are only double vaxxed. Has the government let them down?
I think to some extent there's limits to what the government can do here. I think everyone agrees that there's no role for a mandate for childhood vaccinations, and this is part of an overall trend that we've seen across a range of vaccinations. And so our measles vaccination rates are pretty poor now, and they've been hit hard by 2 years of the pandemic, and so that raises concerns about a range of diseases, and COVID's not the only one there. Okay,
I just want to move on because we're going to get a short period of time. National Party conference, Fran, Christopher Luxon, he's had a couple of missteps recently, and he's had to sing as well this week.
Yeah, that was terrible. Sometimes you should stay in your lane.
He should have stayed in his lane on that one. What about the broader aspect? Has he had missteps with Te Puke, confusion over tax?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's been a range of things, and I just think the discipline needs to be there. I do not know who advises Chris Luxon and who he actually listens to, but it kind of reminds me a bit when Geoffrey Palmer many moons ago became deputy leader and then prime minister. His press secretary was taped, basically, pulling him into line.
Right.
And Christopher needs to listen a bit. He is quite impulsive in what he says. He jumps from new kind of thing to another, and you saw that with all the bad timing around the messaging on Omicron earlier in the year and the orange traffic alert system. Sometimes you just draw breath and make a considered judgment. The tax kerfuffle all week, I mean, that's just nonsensical.
Marc, just on the tax kerfuffle, I mean, you've got them hammering Labor over inflation, and yet, a slight misstep like that, and that they should be, like, having a great week at Labor's expense, and yet that comes along and derails them slightly, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels a little bit like the Judith Collins National Party of never missing a chance to sort of shoot yourself in the foot. But obviously, this is an exception, I think, from what we've seen over the past few months with Christopher Luxon at the helm. He's had a few gaffes, but he's managed to avoid sort of, I guess, a train wreck like we saw last year.
Right, OK. Just on this week, though, with the Labor's cost of living payment, Sarah, I mean, revelations that it's going to dead people, to French backpackers. Has this blown up in their face?
The spirit of the intention was pure, so I believe that it had merit. In terms of operationalising it, I mean, who would have thought that this would have happened? And then you've also got to weigh up the cost administratively of actually trying to correct something like this. So I like to keep the high ground.
So, yeah, good intentions, but, a little bit lacking in delivery.
Yes.
Does that sum up Labor government?
In some ways, but they have also delivered in some big areas as well. And I have to say, Prime Minister is back on her saddle again, at least internationally, and I think that's good because, it doesn't suit a nation to have your leaders looking pathetic, frankly. You do need to perceive them as being strong, at least in some areas.
But just on the cost of living,
delivery,
on the cost of delivery, cost of payment delivery,
yes.
1.2 million rather than 2.1 million dead people, backpackers,
not me.
and not you. Has that have they shot themselves in the foot?
It's been poorly put together, and it shows all the hallmarks of policy on the fly and not getting the operational side sorted out first.
Okay, just Just quickly, Marc, Nationals come off the ball slightly in the latest Roy Morgan poll, down 4 points. Is this weekend's conference a chance for them to turn that around a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's a chance for National to pull itself together, and also for Chris Luxon to demonstrate to the membership, who he is and why he should be leader. The caucus clearly backs him, but he hasn't had that chance to talk with the membership.
Right. We'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you, Marc Daalder, Fran O'Sullivan and Sarah Sparks. Up next, we will cross live to the annual National Party conference in Christchurch. Plus, we met the trumpet player turned teacher turned cop turned MP. We'll be back with his backstory.